here we go. In the bottom right, we've got the blue Infernal player. He is Winckel. I don't know if it's Winckel or Winckel, but I'm kind of just leaning with that.
Yeah. And of course, we have a Vanguard player. I know you all in chat thought that he had gone extinct, or that faction had gone extinct. That's not true. In the upper left, you may know him as the Zerg player from StarCraft 2, but here in Stormgate, he's Erik, the Vanguard player. And you know, Nate, you were talking about tier 4, tier 3 units, next development of tech. We do know about one Vanguard higher tier unit. It's not in the game yet, but if you paid attention to the game awards and the trailer that they dropped there, and it's been in some other stuff, there is some sort of aircraft carrier, bomber, I'm not really sure, that has shown up in some of the things. It's a great big flying unit that looks like it has something that comes out of it. My pocket theory.
Oh man, that sounds awesome. You're giving me like Avengers giant Hella spacecraft vibes now.
That's exactly what it kind of looks like to me, which is pretty cool, right? I don't know how balanced it's going to be because, hey, air units, but it's kind of a cool idea, right?
Well, the best thing is whatever the super hardcore people decide that they want to reject, we can just take all the fun stuff for co-op eventually. So I'm fine with that. Give me a giant floating hangar bay that moves slower than everything else in the game. That kind of sounds awesome.
Oh, you're talking about the Weaver.
It's got to have some kind of giant. Yeah. Well, the Weaver, guys, I would tell you what the Weaver is, but you're not going to see one on this channel at any point anytime soon. So it'd feel like I'd be telling you about something that's not in the game. So it's yeah, it's basically one of those giant tall guys that walk slowly in like Elden Ring that you have to climb up them to take them down, but they're that slow in this game as well. So nobody builds them. Basically the TLDR.
Unironically though, Weavers in this matchup, as the game goes a little bit later, are actually really good. It depends on which Infernal player you're talking to. I'm in the Weaver camp. I know Theory, for example, is in the Weaver camp. Not everyone is. But they give you such an ability to abduct medtechs and abduct Vulcans and start to tear apart that bio ball that is very hard to deal with otherwise. Where I personally, I think Weavers are really solid. Although I did play one player who rushed scouts in the late game with the double upgrade. And it actually handles them really well because these 750 HP, another like 125 HP in terms of white health, massive units that stalk slowly across the earth are actually light units, and they die to dogs very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the Weaver is a unit that conceptually looks cool, but just isn't that much. And here we are on this map, Jagged Maw. We haven't talked too much about it because expectation is that these games typically just revolve around the siege camp, which is now being taken. The sentry post that was put up with a little repair action does get killed. It's important to point out that Vanguard can salvage for a full refund any and all of their buildings except like the main base, right? So there's no world where that turret dying to take the camp is necessarily a good thing, but he was trying to get it as fast as possible too, so maybe this is something that he's accounted for in his plan. On this map, there's a catapult camp that you can take. Some people take one, some people take two, but generally speaking, a lot of the games here revolve around this because it outranges everything you're going to have. It doesn't do friendly fire, it has a tremendous amount of splash damage, and it's also very tanky. So as the pushing player, your objective basically changes from attack to escort, and we're seeing that now. Lancer's trying to get some vision up the high ground. They are very, very tanky Vanguard melee units, so he's just trying to use these to zone and create an opportunity for the catapult to get some big damage in.
We'd have to point out, by the way, that Erik is all in off this. He doesn't have a natural. This is just a one-base scenario, and he will lose the catapult very quickly. And the problem is, Lancers are very good. They're very tanky. They take just about 0 damage, really, from Gaunts. But what they really need, as we see it pop in right now, they need their upgrade. Because once the upgrade happens, depending on how many stacks they have, they move much faster, they attack much faster. And that gives you this opportunity to dive right on top of the Gaunts, which are by far the most important unit in this composition. But you got to get through the brutes, and this small choke right here makes that very, very difficult. Now, if we could take a look at what's happening. Okay, not enough damage was on the siege camp really to try to steal that. So for now, he's just going to guard the siege camp. And remember, the last time we saw when Mixu played, that was the death knell. It was the Infernals able to bring an army together, take the siege camp in a counter way, and because they'd killed enough Vanguard units early, everything just died. well, Eric's doing a really good job of making sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's a very different sort of experience when the Vanguard player goes for it, because you talk about the Vanguard. Well, obviously we know with the Infest, that's the snowball mechanic for the Infernal. Every time that they're killing anything except fiends, they're turning it into more fiends. So when the Gaunts attack them, they basically tag them with that. So they take the camps and they have a big army with that siege camp to go push with. But on the Vanguard side, unless you have figured out some very specific way to get veterancy timing on your units, you don't really have that same ability. So he does have the Lancers out, but the army is just a little bit smaller. So trying to force that fight and push it is very risky too. Because look how low health a lot of these are. As soon as these Lancers start to die, taking any bounce damage from the Gaunts means they're infested. They're just going to release more fiends, so it just goes from bad to worse. And he's got a lot, again, of very low health Lancers, and he's got to deal with a huge push backed by a catapult.
Yeah, your ideal, of course, is to make sure that all the Lancers survive. I mean, that's basic RTS, but especially here as a Vanguard player, because the longer they survive, the better levels they get. And a lot of these low Lancers, you see, like they're 5 HP, but they're only level 0. They don't have any veterancy. If they're going to be able to go, and if they get a kill, if they make something happen, if they get a little bit more XP, they're going to get a lot. They're going to heal up just a little bit off the veterancy. But now, trying to dive on top of things, some of the Lancers were just left on the left side, I guess, looking for a surround, but it's a slow rejoinder. So this catapult will get dove upon. This catapult will die. But the question is, at what cost? Bobs have been pulled here. They're not dying very quickly with the overcharge, but they will die just the same. And these Lancers, Nate, you pointed it out just a little bit ago, these Lancers are so low. Shield popped on one of them, 1,000 HP for 10 seconds to try to keep it alive, and it will stay alive. The problem is, its brothers, its sisters there, and the Lancer army, the Lancer Corps, they're all dead. And the Gaunts, they continue to kite around. That, man, our blue player does such a good job of keeping them alive. It's so easy to just have a bunch of Lancers dive on top of your Gaunts and lose them all. So to keep them all alive means more infests, more push, more pressure, and Erik is in a really rough spot here in this game 1.
That's putting it lightly, as the game reaches its penultimate conclusion, and we see Winckel with the game 1 dub. And it's interesting because the Vanguard players, the dog build, right? Very popular for obvious reasons. You have basically the fastest unit in the game for free at the start. Just make a couple more of them, get the damage upgrade. Taking camps gets easier, but tries to do an early siege push into Infernal. I find the early attacks for Vanguard versus Infernal are generally pretty tough to execute. A lot of I feel like the success has to come from those more nuanced later game army compositions. But it's probably, I'm just going to postulate this one, just put it out there. Maybe he just did that strategy because he assumed he was going to get catapult rushed if he didn't go for it himself. It feels really hard to call with the way that people are playing on that map.
Yeah, and Jagged Maw is very much a map as well where it's... Okay, so the issue really with Vanguard is you don't have a lot of ranged units. You have to dive on top of the catapult to knock... You have ranged units, but not early. So you have to dive on top of that catapult very quickly. You're exposing yourself. It's not all that great. It's a super short rush distance once the stone spires go down. So understandable why he went for that. There are some double racks pressure builds where you build two Lancers at a time and try to contest pretty much all the early creep camps that the Infernal wants to go for. I have found those to be pretty strong, but again, the issue is this siege camp is really kind of throwing everything in the works. Of course, Secluded Grove, Nate, is not that map. Secluded Grove has some speed camps that are a little bit easier to take. The natural is kind of wide open, but you have ramps that you can use to defend it. And again, more importantly, it's all about the Secluded Grove in the middle. And that is something that if the Infernal player is quick enough on, it can be very, very hard for the Vanguard player to try to retake.
Yes, it's one of those maps that progressively opens up as you get those tier 2.5, tier 3-ish units that can break it down, like the Magmadons, like the Atlas and the Vulcan. But worth pointing out, it is just a generally more macro approachable map. The natural is very open, but as we've seen, especially for Vanguard, some of their early defense tools, like the sentry post is just awesome. It's one of the coolest design things I think that they have for Vanguard. You can make a turret that basically does a pittance of damage, not really a lot, but it changes completely based on any unit that you can put inside of it. So you can put the dog in there and turn it into a sensor tower and scan for vision around you. You can put a med tech in it and it'll heal all of your units that are nearby and in an area of effect. It's really powerful. And at the same time, you could just put an exo, just put your marine equivalent unit in there, and then it just turns into a super turret. Or you put the Lancer and it's a buzzsaw turret. So conceptually, they've got a lot of fun stuff to play with. So the map design, maybe what they're aiming for is that it doesn't need to be as constrained into that, okay, you know, the base layouts all are always going to have to be this way. They'd rather give you some more flexible tools to use to take those different bases.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing as well as we talk about this is that there's one map that's not in the competitive pool. It's cool, but it's not in the competitive pool. It's called Boneyard. They're still developing, they're still messing around with it, but it's a really good example of one of the things that actually Monk said in an interview I had with him on Monday, just about a week ago, where they're starting to explore more and more this concept of having more wide open maps, of having maps that are developed more so you have more surrounds. And like a lot of the early maps, and notably there's a map, Twisted Crown, or Twisted something. I'm bad with map names. The map that was in pre-alpha, the map was in, or like the first map that we saw, Titan's Causeway, there we go, is very closed off. And pretty much every new map that we've gotten since then has been a little bit more wide open and a little bit more wide open as we're starting to learn how this game is optimally played. And of course, Nate, you know, like to go that one step further, even in more established RTS games, it takes a while for us to figure out, or for the community to figure out just what's good in a map for the RTS, because you can go and you can say off heritage, oh, these style of maps are really good for this other RTS, and that is very true, but the other RTS didn't have the mechanics that your RTS does, and that's going to mean that you're going to want different things.
Yeah, giving players flexibility to create solutions for the different strategies and problems that are going to come up, though, is definitely a fun approach to that, rather than trying to go for some generic, oh yeah, just everybody just has some long range turret to deter stuff. Taking a unique approach to that is awesome. And we have that shrine going up for the Therium and the natural at pretty, I would say it feels relatively fast timing. So not gonna dump everything into trying to crank out a crazy amount of units and go for a push. So maybe we get to see a little bit more of that Vanguard versus Infernal mid game. I don't particularly know too much about Erik's preferences in Stormgate, so he's, to the best of my knowledge, I've seen some people in chat talking about him like he's the Zerg player from the American StarCraft scene, so professional player in the Latin American region, but kind of going for Vanguards. I'm not entirely sure what to expect here, what his strategy is going to be, or if it's just going to be okay, Lancers, Exos, try and micro and take some good trades on the field.
It's kind of interesting looking at what players coming in from other games are choosing as their faction and going forward. I mean, a lot of people play Vanguard because that was what the first race was, or that was the first faction available. And then a lot of more people are like, well, you know, Infernal's the new hotness, we're going to choose that. And like, if you look at ladder stats, I think 60% of players are playing Vanguard right now, and a lot of new players are playing Vanguard. So anyways, it's interesting again to see what gets.
You telling me that the humans are drawn to the human faction? Are you kidding me right now, BeoMulf?
Are you trying to say that because are you trying to say that because I'm drawn to the not humans, I'm not human?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not here to label you, man. If you want to be an Infernal, that's up to you. That's not my business. I'm just saying. I feel like, yeah, it's one of those funny things, because it seems like it's a common theme, because you're like, oh, okay, well, they're people, he's got a gun, this is fairly straightforward. And you look at the guns and you're like, is he gonna stab me with that, or is he gonna throw it? And then you see him throw it and you're like, okay, you kind of figure it out. How about this though? A lot of Lancers to push this third, but also with the quick Hornet behind it. So the Hornet, it's a unit that you don't really need a lot of to get the value out of it. You don't want it, of course, to get taken down by the Gaunts. There's that 1,000 hit point shield you were talking about. That's a top bar ability for the Vanguard. It's 1,000 HP shield. It lasts for 10 seconds. So if your opponent is throwing something big at you and you can land that at the right time, you could soak up a bunch of Shadow Flyers with it. And this of course is just being used as support for the Lancer attack. Now the base finishing means that the Shroud appears here, so that white health is going to start regenerating and taking the trade over time. BeoMulf gets a little bit tougher.
And it does damage over time from infest damage, or healing over time, I guess, from the white health. Does mean that at the end of the day, Erik's going to have to back on up here. His Hornets get very low and they're going to have to retreat back home, but this was substantive damage. Right, this was a lot of army of Winckel going down. This was a lot of power, really, from Winckel getting shut down just a little bit. And as we talk about these bio balls, this strong late game, really, not even mid game Vanguard army, a lot of Vanguard or a lot of Inferno players we noticed in the Mixed 2 series are just trying to play to not let the Vanguard get there. Because when it's there, you're having to go for exploding imp flanks and weavers and hellborns, and your army has to get very expensive and gets very slow, and even then it's not necessarily a sure thing. So the fact that Erik was able to go and get so much damage done, was able to, I don't think he got any imps, but he shut down a lot of the army of our red player. By doing that, he buys himself more of a window into the late game, buys himself more of a window to get onto 3 bases, onto 4 bases, start to really crank medtechs out and exos out, and these units that are where it gets much harder, I guess, for the Inferno player to properly fight.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things that Mana did yesterday, I'm gonna just keep singing his praises because he was probably one of the more creative Infernal players that was in this tournament, at least from what I've seen. But he was leaving imps in kind of random spots, not in the middle of the map, but off to those like side paths you don't go down as much. And during some of the fights, he just had 1 or 2 that just flame on and just yeeted it in there against the Exo army, made a couple of really sick moves. So you do have a lot of, you know, in a way, it's a lot of trees. It's very flat. You're not really going too much around elevation, but there's still quite a few dark corridors on this map. So as it starts to get bigger, you know, being able to land those shots with units like the Shadow Flyer. So you see, he tries to take the shielded Hornet and bait the attack. Once the Shadow Flyer activates, it can't turn off unless the target dies. So hypothetically, you can bait the Shadow Flyers onto your Hornet and then use Return to Hangar Bay. You will drag them all back into your base. So you can do some funky things with that. But all needless to say, he manages to counter micro. He doesn't let it get activated on that. Otherwise, they would have just all blown up on the shield and he'd get nothing. So heads up play to try and do that for Erik, but also Winckel has the awareness to not fall for it at the same time.
I was about to say, man, what are these imps doing? Then I realized it was all going to the base north side. But I think it's actually really interesting here that not only has Winckel taken the 3rd base, which is no therium on it. Fine, sure, okay. He's taken a 4th base that doesn't really have accessible therium, that you have to crack it open. So no middle, and he hasn't cracked the therium either. Which again, when we talk about the late game, when we talk about these late game Infernal armies, or I guess we never properly leave the mid game because we're lacking tier 3 at the moment, but you get what I'm saying. You really do need a ton of therium to make sure that you have Magmadons, which, you know, it's questionable whether that's a good unit to have here, but to make sure you have Hellborn, to make sure that you can spend the 25 therium a pop to go and build, to make your imps explode, all of these. It's a very expensive therium army. So already we look at Secluded Grove, and the 3rd base not having it's a bit of a problem. There's no therium on the north side, and by the way, the Hornets have found it, and they're going to rank up in the extreme as they knock all these imps down. And Nate, the army of our Inferno player is so far away.
Yeah, there's a really interesting thing happening too, because he's moved into the Hellborn. So you have the long range single target mitigation on the table, but they are susceptible to those air units. And even though the Hellborn can be a very strong force in the back line, if the Hornets dive it, it's not like they have the most hit points out of all the Infernal units. So it's something to keep in mind if he's expending charges there instead of on the Magmadons. We do have them coming out. And actually, there is a Weaver, so anybody who wanted to know what that unit looks like, it is here. It can see high and low ground, but as you can see, he's very slow. He's very slow. It's like one of those guys that's like off the map in Apex that just kind of hangs out and sometimes steps on you. That's about it. That's all I got. It's the best reference I've got.
Step on me, Weaver.
Hey, maybe. Hey, I'm not here to judge.
But I think unironically, I think Weavers are by. Oh, this is not a good rally here coming in from Erik. He's gonna have to. I guess he's gonna be locked into the fight at least until he procs his passive. But he's gonna have to run away. There's a random imp, but doesn't really seem like it. Oh, it can explode. He gotta cut away from this. Not gonna take too much damage though, especially not with the med tech there. And I think Nate, conceptually, this is actually gonna be a pretty good fight here coming in from Erik as he gets on.
It's cool, but like it can't run away. So
yeah, exactly.
And the thing. It has a very interesting design trait in that it is guaranteed to do like 10% max health damage per strike, so it doesn't really matter what it's fighting, but it makes it a little less efficient against the small guys. But you can't run away with it. You can't run away with it. So as soon as you take the fight with the Weaver, your Weaver is dead, or you're going to win the game in that battle, basically. So big cleanup. The middle of the map secured for Vanguard. And I just like to point out, during all of this, he built the command post. He's taken that base and he's mining the Luminite. This isn't one of those games where it's like, oh, I won, I'm going to push back, overcommit, and not have anything. No, he's on top of it. Erik macroing hard behind this, has a lot of mobility with the Exos, and we're seeing just a completely different game playing out here compared to Jagged Maw. And not really surprising based on what we've seen so far in this tournament, but talk about a hell of a defensive setup on the inside base. It's got, what was that, 5 Shroud Stones, 4 Meat Farms. The Exos are going to try and come in here and push through it. Don't think that there's too much time to send everything through. If he dives in for the imps, maybe he's worried about overextending, but I think he has vision of where that army on the north side is. There's something stalling him moving on the way down by the looks of things. So he should be able to clean most of this up. Yeah, those were the Lancers. They were kind of holding the army on the top side. And I won't lie, I find it interesting that he is continuing to add in the Weavers. Those Magmadon stomps against the Exos can be crazy good, but perhaps he's worried about the kiting ability in the open field. Unlike a Marine from StarCraft, the Exo only gets a speed boost, and it's only when it attacks a unit. So you can't just activate it at any point. It's something to keep in mind. If you're running away, it's not as simple as just activating an ability. You do need to be landing some of those stutter steps to keep the movement speed increase going.
Actually do, but you talk about, Magmadons versus Exos, but you really want are Hellborn. They can actually punish the poke a lot better. Magmadons are going to run in, they're going to go down. And as we can see, the values of the Weavers here, yeah, they're slow, and they do force you to make a more of a concerted effort, a slower push. But they can knock the medtechs down. They can start to abduct these. I mean, we see some of these Exos are already tier 3 Exos. And Exos are very good. They are. But tier 2, tier 3 Exos are far better. The shield as well.
The shield? How did he? Are you kidding me? Okay, so
with the evac.
Wow, the evac eventually gets killed. The fact that the shield is still up, so the Atlas does die. But we just witnessed three very beautiful things there. So that is the Weaver's primary ability. It has a hook that deals damage, and you can pull in units on the ground. So this is what the unit's fantasy is supposed to be. It's like this big, slow guy that can be an anti-tank. It absolutely shreks buildings, but it can hook in key units that are kind of exposed or near the front, including hooking the Atlas across the tree line, mind you. So all you really need to do is land it. You don't even have to have that open. Imp Flames on from the right side, not going to be able to close, however, on the Exos. And again, it's a tanky force, but it's also slow. A lot of melee. The Hellborn in the back's trying to land some juicy shots, but one on its own isn't gonna be enough to stop it, especially with these med techs here. Very powerful support unit helping to keep these Exos alive.
Now you're really looking for about 5. That's when the damage starts to get really punishing against the Exos. And we can see, I mean, these Exos are in the orange. They're in the red. They are starting to take some damage, but I mean, tier 3 Exos, they just don't die. And maybe this is some of the fact that I've been lost a lot of games to late game Exo balls, but realistically, they get very strong with the HP buffer that they get. They do more damage, and with these med techs behind, and theoretically the evac as well, just maybe being able to go in and pick them and save them, it gets a bit of a problem. Even the Shadow Flyers not able to take a good angle, so they're not going to knock that evac down, which means, well, the Atlases can run forward. And now this base that was, you talked about how well defended it was. Yeah, we're going to see Winckel tap out of this.
Erik takes it. Very well done there, and then bringing in more of the Atlases towards the end too. Just what a switch up though, right? We talk about how that Jagged Maw is just like the map that tilts everybody, and then we get to like Secluded Grove, and we just get the best games. It's fun.
It really is. And it's kind of funny. I looked at that map and I'm like, wow, I think this is going to be better for Inferno players than Broken Crown, because Infernals tend to expand faster, and you kind of go that Mass Weaver, Hellborn, whatever setup, you can take the middle of the map very nicely, and then it becomes very hard for the Vanguard player to take. But Erik did a really nice job of playing around, of putting pressure when he needed to, of delaying that army, of putting pressure on the third base, which means the middle of the map's going to be hard to take. And also, maybe a mistake or two out of Winckel. He took the northwest base, and he kind of took the secluded base on the right side. But you could just take the middle map, and that's worth more almost than taking the other 2 bases.
Yeah, it's crazy the decision-making trees that we're seeing the players go down, and I love it because this kind of just calls back to what we were talking about earlier. When you get two players that can push each other, and we see the game reach that phase, it's just awesome. Erik, blue Vanguard in the bottom left, Winckel, the red Infernal in the top right, and you know the comments, of course, it's hard not to notice people saying, where's the Vanguard? Where's the Vanguard competing? What we want to see. We want to see people kind of show how it's intended to be played and get more of a fair look at what this matchup can be. And that's what this series is at least starting to deliver for us. So it's pretty cool. When you get those unit compositions together, they're a little bit complicated. There's some nuance, new abilities coming from other games that you kind of have to learn for them. But as you figure it out, you already said it, but those exos, once they get the veterancy up, BeoMulf, they just start rolling. It's not just like, oh, they deal one more damage or something. For a lot of the units, it's either like plus 10% damage or plus like 50 or 60 health. And then for other units like the Hornet, you're talking about like 20% attack speed boost per level. And then the difference between one that's fresh out the factory and one that's tier 3 is completely night and day on the veterancy side of things.
Oh, and by the way, when you're talking about these percentage increases, it's not like, well, it's plus 10% on what you previously had, or it's like, no, it's just additive. So a tier 3 Lancer, for example, I think does about 160% damage of its base damage, right? So
crazy.
Yeah, it becomes very important as the Vanguard player to go and keep them alive. And it becomes tremendously important. Oh no, he's gonna get it gone. Oh, that.
Hey, see, there you go. The pooch leveled up too. He's got his little badge, so he's going to be a little bit stronger, a little bit more annoying to deal with if he gets healed and comes back. But that little indicator next to the health bar for the Vanguard units, you don't get upgrades. You don't get it +1. Your units get upgraded by doing stuff. So good on him doing some stuff early on. Not going to be able to delay this expansion too much, but he's happy. He's got his command post done back home. A couple extra racks going up in the front to complete the quasi wall, as it were. Don't know that everybody's agreed on how exactly they like to wall off on these maps, since there's so many different ways to approach it, right? Like you could do it a little bit closer, break open the back trees and take your third over there, or take the third on the low ground. You've got options. We see that forest opened up on the right side because, as we've mentioned several times, the Infernals absolutely love taking that speed camp with all the goats to turn into fiends early on.
It's kind of an interesting decision as well, right? To take the left camp versus the right camp. Because the right camp, it gives you Therium and Luminite. That's pretty important, right? We've seen how impactful the Therium units are. The left camp just gives you Luminite, but it's probably a little bit safer. It's a more direct path on into from the natural into the third. And ooh, is this scout he's gonna get a second gun, and this, I don't think this ranks him up. I don't think it's quite enough XP. No, it's not, and it's gonna survive. Okay, and this is what you want to do as a Vanguard player. As we see this rush down on into the speed camp, you want to contest this as long as possible. It's a great way to go harvest, to go farm these Gaunts early on to cause some problems, because Lancers are just faster. Gaunts are not as they are weaker and they are slower. So you just kind of kill them. Ideally, you just have enough stuff out there that you're able to kill them on the rejoinder. But again, this Lancer's about like 20% HP. It's gonna be fine. And Nate, look,
he's got 2 more.
There's more.
I love it though. This is like the natural rotation, it feels. Everybody's so focused on taking the camps early with the Infernal that not only do we have a macro opening out of Vanguard, but it's a macro opening centered around simply delaying that. Is he going to do game-ending damage with this? No, but you've already pointed out that he's stacking experience on his units so that they can get that veterancy faster and perhaps supplement a follow-up attack. But most importantly, he's completely denying the entirety of that snowball mechanic, like we've said, from the infest onto the camps. And while he may eventually get into a place where he can take those camps, so far we're a lot further into the game than we have been for any of the other matches without the Infernals being able to take a single camp so far.
And as the Vanguard, and as an Infernal player, when the Vanguard can prevent you from going and taking the camps, it feels so bad. Your entire early game, and a lot of these builds are built around, I'm going to go take the speed camp, and I'm going to go take the resource camp, and I'm going to go take the vision camp. And it'd be one thing if you were going to say for a quick expand build. It's like, okay, well, I'm giving up the map anyways. But so much of the meta right now is on taking these camps as quick as possible, making that money, making those fiends. And with these heavy Lancer pressure, that becomes very hard to do. A similar reason why we see these quick scout openings, these scout upgrade openings so often. The other thing I'm actually curious about, and this is a kind of a micro thing that you can do, generally more with camps more than actually in fights. So if you have a bunch of Vanguard units all doing damage together, the unit that kills gets about 80% of the XP, and 20% of that XP goes around to everyone else. And one of the things
see a little EXP share, just a little bit.
Yeah. But if you go and you pull everything back, and I forget what the range is, if you pull everything but the one unit that gets the kill back, they get 100% of it. It's not like it's 80 and then like there's 20 in the float that they don't get. So what we've seen some Vanguard players trying to do is doing what they can to stack XP. To stack XP on one Lancer or two Lancers to get them up to level 1, to get them up to level 2. But right now there's a Hornet and a bunch of upgraded here because they got the kinetic redirection on top of things. And he's going to dive right on top of these Gaunts. They're fully proc. These Gaunts are, well, with good micro, they're staying alive just a little bit longer. Nice surround for the Fiends as well. This Hornet's getting very low, but
oh, there's the shield.
Got a shield. It's unkillable, Nate.
So the Gaunts are no longer near the Lancers, which is huge as well. You're talking about the kinetic redirect. So effectively, this upgrade gives the Lancers a stim every time they get attacked. So again, it's not one of those things that you can just manually activate. It's not an ability that you press, but it's an in-combat ability. So it helps with the maneuverability of those forces. And we saw, like you said, that shield on the Hornet to bring it back. Nicely done. And the most important thing when it comes to stacking experience, like if you played like a traditional bio game in StarCraft, you think, okay, yeah, cheap units, you kind of throw them away. You want to trade and take and win those trades with your cheaper guys. But it's not really quite like that in this game. That EXP, that veterancy on your units is so important. Retaining them, getting them healed, keeping them together is such a big deal. We see a lot of players keep them out on the map instead of healing because you obviously want to get the camps as well. But keeping the units around from the early phases of the game is incredibly highly rewarded for Vanguard players.
You know, Nate, I'm actually really surprised as we see what's happening right now. So there are 2 camps on the map, and there are actually a couple flowers. So on Secluded Grove, there are flowers that will give you Therium or Luminite, depending on which one you find, and that's pretty nice. But on this map, there are a bunch of flowers that drop healing fruit. Whatever, I don't know that there's actually a term for it, but you know, it is a thing in other games. I don't think there's actually a name for it in this game yet. But anyways, that'll heal some of your units. That can be very nice. And actually, I think we saw Erik use that on his pressure on the right side. But the other way to heal before medtechs are out are the healing camps. Actually, we see one just around 12 o'clock, like 11:30. We see one at, you know, at 5:30 or something.
Awesome demonstration here of the turret post, by the way. You can getting the healing aura. So don't want your med tech to spend all of its energy healing up your army after the fight. Just throw your med tech in a turret and let it heal the whole entire army for basically free. I mean, you've already got the turret, right? That's kind of the cool thing. So comes around here, snipes the shadow flyer, picks off the stone, and we have 2 more being built. And this is always one of the worst feelings. You realize in Stormgate, buildings that are under construction they're not just safe because they're under construction. It does lose veterancy flyer there, but continuing up with the harass, you can kill constructing buildings with a few harass units pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. They're very much lacking some of the armor that you might just like internally expect them to have. By the way, talking about that, so 4 shadow flyers were built to knock this down, and it was almost really good for Erik. He did keep 2 of his Hornets alive, did lose 1, but it is actually so punishing. It's not as bad, right? Because we're on 3 bases. We have 3 Therium lines for Winckel. He's developing his economy a little bit more. But committing to those Shadow Flyers and not getting the kills on the Hornets is actually, it's insanely expensive. And 50 Therium doesn't sound like a ton, but that's 2 Gaunts worth, right? That is that's a significant development of your tech. And when you get 4 of them, hey, look, that's 200 Therium. That is very expensive as you try to make this pressure happen. But now Erik on the left side is going to again deny this base, or at least deny the stack defense for a time. And this army is finally the complexity that you would like. It's got a couple med techs, it's got those exos, all the upgrades are done. They can run in, they can kite, they can do whatever they want. And this 4th base is not going up for just a little bit longer.
Yeah, you can see he's taking a couple of the hits on the kinetic redirect and just choosing to push forward with the Lancers. He has so much health and of course the sustain from the med techs that it becomes a lot more difficult to punch through this little bio ball. But he wants to take the fight as long as he can to also stack the experience, since everything that dies here, like you pointed out, gets spread across all of these units, and it's no longer just trading for a few. He's getting a lot of XP from these fights. We see a few of those Lancers getting the veteran status at less than 10% health. Bring those bad boys home, get that med tech and a turret, heal them up, and move them on out. By the way, just want to point this out. We're seeing Weavers again. Very interesting choice from Winckel, just kind of demonstrating, whether it works or not, we're at least getting to see them, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And again, we talked about design-wise, the lash for 60 damage and able to pull units out is really nice. And the HP, the percentage HP attack is also pretty cool. But I just like them because, like, stylistically, they're super cool. They're just this massive kind of hulking Cthulhian horror.
It's beautiful.
Forward, it's kind of terrifying in the best possible way.
Yeah, I love it. If they determine that they're like, look, how do we have a unit this slow to get people to make it? Well, we're seeing people use it, which on one hand I do really like to see, but against this type of army, I wonder if there are not enough high value targets to try and grab, or maybe he'll try to grab one of the big veteran sea lancers into the middle mass. There's a few Hellborn on the high ground, very long range. They've got a long windup for their attack, but that's essentially your breaker, right? If everything in front of your army holds the Exo army away, then typically these guys are what's going to get the damage done. However, they don't have a lot of health on their own, so you do not want them to be exposed. Very important to keep that in mind. If they get onto your Hellborns, they don't last too long.
And Hellborn, by the way, can be very good. They can also be very, very bad against Vanguard. So if they hit your Lancers and there are no Exos behind, they do just about 0 damage. They do like 2 damage or something. It's very, very low because, again, because of how Lancers, because of that damage mitigation armor that they have. And literally all they do is they proc the Lancer. They proc the Lancer passive. They proc hyperkinetic, or they proc kinetic redirect, which is great for the Vanguard player. On the flip side, if you target them on the Exos, they do really nicely. They chunk through them really well. They punish the poke over and over again. So you have to be very on point when you're playing this. You want to actually go and get the splash there on the Exos, shut that down, and then you can maybe make something else happen. As nice dodge there. I think the Sky Mine took out a Shadow Flyer. So we're gonna see this Atlas play a little bit more annoying. Well placed Infestation Pit, or Nightfall Infestation gets about half the army. And look at that.
Pulls in the Atlas, both of them. Absolutely wild maneuvering there. So you're seeing that hook from the Weaver. It's not worried about terrain. It's not worried about high ground or trees, but it's coming over. We're seeing him get a few of those smacks in with the Hellborns in the back trying to land those shots. The drop micro is really fun to see, but losing one of those Atlas, that is also a big deal. Very expensive unit. We're kind of getting to some very fleshed out mixed tier 3 armies, and I'd love to see a BeoMulf. Look, we're 1-1 in a pretty awesome match against one of the most competitive Vanguard players that we've seen in this qualifier so far, and it's awesome to see. If you're looking at this big boy, the 3 legs, that's the Atlas. It has a huge area of effect attack, but it functions like a catapult from Age of Empires. So you can dodge the shot. It kind of displays where it's going to be landing, but it also does devastating damage. There's an upgrade that lights the ground on fire after the attack finishes, and it can do friendly fire. So a couple things to keep in mind while you're watching this bad boy go launch a bunch of missiles across the map, because the dropship can pick them up while they're sieged. Very important to keep in mind as well.
And on top of that, when we talk about things, it's very important to point out, I know we're not on Jagged Maw, but this catapult does friendly fire. The neutral catapult on Jagged Maw, maybe some other maps if we eventually get there, or if they design those, that does not do friendly fire. But now this pressure coming out of Erik is really well positioned. He's ahead of everything. We heard a couple imps try to explode, but the Lancers are buffering it for now, and they're not taking the damage. So, honestly, this is probably even worse than just losing the base, because not only are the imps going down, you're spending an additional 25 times the number of imps that exploded to try to break this position. And again, that's not really working. So now we see a couple lashes on these Atlases, but again, it's 1,000 HP. Cutting through this is nigh impossible. And in the meantime, the entire front portion of this army gets knocked down. Hellborns are somewhat exposed, but luckily for Winckel, there are approximately 9,000 turrets that they can retreat back to.
Yeah, and we're seeing here Erik takes the Exos forward, takes out the Shadow Flyers to create a little bit of opportunity to make sure he can get those drop ships out. And in case, you mentioned it earlier, but worth mentioning again, the evac can place a mine behind itself in the air. It is an anti-air only mine. It functions like the old school StarCraft Seeker missile, where once it acquires a target, it kind of slowly winds up and then dives after it. It also slows the target that it hits. So the evac doesn't really have any combat abilities, but you can leave that behind yourself as a deterrent, and that actually ends up soaking up a bunch of the hits too. Has 3 Atlases sieged on the high ground, bringing in the Hedgehogs to support this as well. And Erik is making a big push. Needs to be careful of some of the Atlas shots. We're hitting a few of these units in the back, and As you mentioned, BeoMulf, those Hellborns are keeping their distance, but it's a whole lot of Vanguard on his front door.
And it's pretty cool to see these Hedgehogs added in as well. They do so much more damage to the static defense, which again, that's the thing that was holding Erik back for so long. So we talked about 9,000 Shroud Stones. Now it's about 2, 3, 4 maybe on the left side. Most of them have gone down, which opens up this opportunity. Now we're going to see both evacs go down, and that takes out a lot of power from this position. It makes these Atlases a lot more targetable, a lot more diveable, and one of these Atlases, I think, yeah, will finally go down to the Hellborn. Hellborn do, of course, outrange them. The problem is the rest of the army. Yeah, they're Hellborn on the left side, sure. Nate, how do you kill this army in the middle?
I don't think you do at this point. It is just it just feels, you look at that mini map, you see the stream of blue moving across, and the Hellborns, like you mentioned, they're the long range units, but you need the meat in front of them, and there's no meat anymore. It's over. It's all gone. So everything has been cleared out. The top left base, he tried to retake it, but he actually sent more units over there before Winckel even had a chance to tap out, and he does. Erik with a 2-1 victory and a beautiful demonstration of some complete start to finish Vanguard play. Like, we haven't really gotten to see much of that in this tournament, since I don't think anybody's surprised aggressive builds reign king in an early beta tournament. But when you get to see it played out like that, it is pretty awesome. Pretty good game, both sides. But yeah, fun conclusion there, huh?